Hebrews 12:18 through 29. We do have some leftovers, at least from my perspective, some things that we need to cover still. Hebrews 12:18. For you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, or to a blazing fire, and to darkness, and gloom, and whirlwind, and to the blast of a trumpet, and the sound of the words, which sound was such that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken to them. For they could not bear the command, even if a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. All this a reference to the events of Exodus 19 and 20 at Sinai. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, and to the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the myriads of angels, and to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking, for if those did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven. Okay, so this whole thing is a lesser, greater argument. Look, they were at Sinai, and they were scared. And in fact, in that part of the argument, there are two arguments. They all were scared, and Moses, superstar servant A number one, he was also scared. You're not even there. You're at something much greater. So, see to it you do not refuse him who speaks. For if those did not escape when they refused him who warned on the earth, how much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven? And now he's going to refer to the events of Sinai and quote Haggai 2, and this second time the Lord is speaking now from heaven. His voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude, by which, or through which, we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Okay. We've covered a lot of text last week, a lot of thoughts from it. There are some more thoughts I have, and I'm sure you do too. Be prepared to share them. Thoughts to consider. Number one, Moses was not the only servant of God ever to be full of fear. Moses, it says in verse 21, and so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. That word fear, if you keep your hand here, turn over to Mark chapter 9. We will see Moses again in Mark 9, but I'm more concerned with what Peter says in Mark 9. In Mark 9, verse 2, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and brought them up on a mountain, on a high mountain, by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his garments became radiant and exceedingly white, as no launderer on earth can whiten them. Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And he did not know what to answer, for they had become terrified. Then a cloud formed, overshadowing them, and a voice came out from the cloud, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. All at once they looked around and saw no one with them anymore except Jesus alone. Okay. Quick survey. Does anybody in here think that God was well pleased with the idea that Peter had put forth? No. Now, here's where Moses' situation and Peter's situation are the same. Verse 6 says, they became terrified. That is the same word that Moses says, I am full of fear. So you have servant number 1, full of fear. Servant number 2, full of fear. Now, how do their reactions differ? One of them, in his fear, limited what he said to, I'm full of fear. What did the other one do? The other one did not, in fact, the other one doesn't even mention his fear according to the account. The other one did not limit, but expanded what he said to suggesting, even encouraging others to do something that God did not want or approve. What should Peter have done? Easier for us to say now, but this is the point. What should Peter have done? Huh? Wait. He should have waited. He could have said, I'm scared, and then waited. Always wait for God to tell you what to do. The flip side of the coin is, well, he did something. I mean, at least he did something, which is often put forward as justification. And that's not even the right word. They're like an expectation. Well, he should have done, the assumption is, he should have done something. So at least he did something. This begs or makes the point, doing something is not always good, right? Oh, at least he did something. Yeah, go ask Nadab and Abihu. Ask Uzzah. Ask others. Yeah, they did something too, right?
Sometimes we hear the phrase, don't just stand there, do something. In this case, it's don't just do something.
Stand there. I like it. That's quotable. Quotable quotes.
That's not me. I've read that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
John didn't say it. I don't like it. Yeah, that's good. That's worth repeating there. Don't just, I got to say it again. Don't just do something. Stand there. I have to remember that at home. Okay. But we credit them at home for having the right attitude. We want to encourage zeal in them and a desire to do what is right, but at the same time, within boundaries. We want to encourage that in our children. Little Raphael is always trying to help by doing the wrong thing, but he's always trying to help. He's being a good boy. God wants the same thing from us. Yes, don't not have the desire to do something, but have the respect to wait to be told what to do. And as soon as he says it, whatever it is, you do it. Okay, another thought about do not refuse him who is speaking. Now I'm kind of going in order. I'm skipping over a lot because we covered some last week, and I'm just going to skip over a lot. And maybe you have a thought. Verse 25, see to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. This is the beginning in his last, y'all need to continue to be faithful. This is the beginning of the y'all need to continue to be faithful at the end of his argument. So the argument, look at these two mountains, and now you need to be sure that you don't refuse him who is speaking. This word is used several times. I'll just put up some of them. 1 Timothy 5:11. Refuse to put younger widows on the list. Same word. So we better not refuse to put younger widows on the list. This time the double negative is on purpose. In fact, it will be through all these. Refuse foolish and ignorant speculations. So we better not refuse foolish and ignorant speculations. By the way, these two I want to talk about in combination for a second, although they're not directly related, but they are somewhat related. In Matthew 22, you don't even have to turn there. Matthew 22, the Sadducees who don't believe there is a resurrection come up to Jesus. They think they got him, and he says to them, do you remember his argument? There is a resurrection based on what? Do you remember?
The tense of the verb.
The tense of the verb. Right. There is a resurrection. And then he quotes Exodus, and he says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the living. So, I am, here's the tense of the verb, this is the argument, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, here's his conclusion. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Was there anything about the resurrection in what he quoted?
Not directly. No.
Not directly. Now, they had to get there by implication. Now listen to what he says. when he's countering them, he says, you are mistaken, not understanding the necessary implication. It says, you don't understand the scripture. You are mistaken, not understanding the scriptures, nor the power of it. But right now we're just talking about how did they get to this doctrine? You got there because you didn't understand a necessary inference. Okay? Now, in 1 Timothy 5, so turn to 1 Timothy 5 here. There is, in this passage, we draw from this passage a very obvious necessary inference. In verse 16, 1 Timothy 5:16, if any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened. Question: may a church do anything it wants with its treasury? No. And you can get that from this passage right here. No. If the church could do anything it wants with its treasury, then it wouldn't matter who this widow. You're a widow? Come on in. But no, not this widow. And so the necessary inference is, although it doesn't say it this way, the necessary inference is a church may not just do anything it wants with its treasury. Okay, so if we refuse, is that pretty, who couldn't get what I've just said so far out of this text? It's pretty obvious. No, a church may not just do anything it wants with its treasury. That would be obvious. Are there some people who, even having been instructed, refuse to follow that necessary implication? Yes, right? So we need to be careful. Refuse foolish and ignorant speculation. So what I'm talking about is, the way I'm using this word right now is anything that's not statement, command, example, necessary inference, we refuse to deal with it. I think you understand what I'm saying. Comments or questions? Uh-oh, something happened here. Uh-oh. 1 Timothy 4:7, have nothing to do with worldly fables. Fit only for old women. On the other hand, discipline for yourself for the purpose of godliness. Be careful what you're paying attention to. I don't know exactly how they're using the word fable, the original word, but what do you think of when you hear of a fable?
Made up thing?
Yeah, right. Anything made up. Where did you get that doctrine? Confucius. I'm sorry. Either he borrowed it from the Bible or from God, from natural revelation, or it's just made up, right? Reject a factious man after a first or second warning. So the question is, if we don't reject a man, if we refuse a factious man after a first and second warning, then we failed God. So we have to refuse. Here's the point. See to it that we do not refuse any of these things or anything God has said. It doesn't matter what these are just this is where this word is used, and I figured that would be neat to throw that out there. That's the way I think. Here's another way this word is used. They all alike began to make refuses. The first one said to him, I have bought a piece of land and I need to go out and look at it. Please consider me refused. Another one said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I am going to try them out. Please consider me refused. Another one said, I have married a wife and for that reason I cannot come. It's the same word. Here's the point. Another way to refuse God is to make excuses for refusing Him. So I'm already refusing Him, and then when you start to make an excuse, that's another way of refusing Him. So we're just piling mistake upon mistake. Gary's having a thought. Oh, no thoughts from Gary. Comment or question? George.
What you're comparing here makes it obvious that differing levels of disruptive intent don't necessarily change the level of danger. In other words, we're supposed to be equally refusing of foolish and ignorant speculations. But hey, at least they're not being factious, they're just ignorant. No, the danger is the same.
Yep.
And so the devil might be working through a
Seemingly.
right. That person might be truly ignorant,
Yeah.
but the danger is the same because the devil's always on purpose.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, there is factious and even the old women with the fables that don't mean any harm. But the danger is still there.
Right. Yeah, like there's a hierarchy of the watchman on the wall doesn't say, oh, that one's only got one bow and arrow. I was reading this morning, actually, an article that John, it's in a magazine he gave me. It was about Babyface Nelson. Back in the 1930s, 40s, he was a gangster in the United States. And some of the gangsters had 38 revolvers. Some of the gangsters had brand new, fully automatic machine guns. Which ones do you think the FBI were worried about? All of them. Oh, he only has a 38. I'm not going to worry about him. Oh, really? Features of our service or our worship. Here in verse 28. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude. We'll talk about that in a second. By which we may offer to God an acceptable service or worship, however your translation translates it. Remember this. All worship is service, but not all service is worship. Worship is a subset of service. This word is our word, or their word, service. So it includes more than just what we're doing, right? It's about your life, like Romans 12. So whether or not it's our worship, what we're doing now, what we're about to do, or whether we're out there living, we should be having grace or showing gratitude. Remember what Romans 1 says about how these people began their descent into depravity. In the text it says they gave up two things: treating God as holy, which goes back to we don't just do whatever we want, because when Nadab and Abihu did whatever they wanted, God killed them and said, I'm doing this so you will know to treat me holy. That's verse 3. So, treat him as holy and at the same time giving thanks. Generally speaking, Christians shouldn't walk around unthankful. Generally speaking. That's the understatement of the year. I was going to say grumpy. And look, I'm looking in the mirror here. It should be acceptable, right? Because we can't just do whatever we want. No, it's got to actually be acceptable to God, right? In reverence and in awe, these are two words, words of fear and reverence. We need to be as filled with alarm as they were about God. You have not come to a mountain where they were scared to death. But in verse 29, do all this, for our God has not changed. Our God is now a consuming fire. Yeah, look at Sinai, consuming fire. Now look now, consuming fire. We need to be as filled with fear as they were back then. In fact, they begged because they were terrified. They begged that no further word be spoken to them, for they could not bear the command. They were so scared, they were begging, please don't let him talk to us anymore. Now, having said that, in Deuteronomy 5, we learn that when they begged out of their fear, it was a good thing. And God had done it on purpose to them. Deuteronomy 5, and we'll pick up in 22 through 27 recounts the same thing. They were scared. They said, no, please don't talk to us. Deuteronomy 5:28. The Lord heard the voice of your words. This is Moses speaking to them. And when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people which they have spoken to you. They have done well in what they have spoken. Oh, that they had such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always. He puts them in this mountain, he makes them go through this thing, and he says, I'm doing this on purpose to you. Because I want you never... The world has an expression that is borrowed from us. So I'm reclaiming that right now. God wanted to put the fear of God into them. That's what he wanted to do there. And Hebrews 12:13 says, you haven't come to that. You've come to something worse. You've come to God, who is this consuming fire. So if they, then we. Comment?
I have a question.
Question.
Verse 28. There's layers to this question. Let me ask you. It's kind of an either or and thing going on here for me.
Yes.
Is what he is referring to, does it include our corporate time together? Is it only our corporate time together? Does it not necessarily imply our corporate time together? Is that what
So
I'm saying?
let us offer to God an acceptable service.
Yes.
Yeah, it's yes, it includes it.
Okay.
But it's life. It's life. The way you live life.
Okay, so he's not necessarily using this phrase because he wants to make sure to include that in there, but you can assume that because
Yes.
it's that overreaching.
Right. It's a
So
blanket.
he's not trying to even come close to narrowing in.
I would suggest he's not. He may be doing it on purpose. He may be
Okay.
doing it on purpose. For example, in chapter 9, he used this word. Now, he uses this word all over chapter 12 and 13. But chapter 9, verse 1, the first covenant had divine regulations, had regulations of divine worship, is what the New American Standard says. It's the same word, it's service, but here it's more specific about to what we would call this worship they were doing at the temple. That's what that is. So yes, both.
So for example, if somebody makes the argument, if somebody goes to this verse to explain why we should dress like we're going to court on Sunday morning, would you feel like that's an appropriate application? Well, maybe that's an unfair question.
I mean, if they're going to make that argument from this verse, then you should say we're always going to court. We should dress like we're always going to court.
Okay.
That's what I would say. Colossians 3:16 and 17 says, whatever you do in worship, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord. And this expression is here. Am I going to go into that next? Have grace or show grace. Well, looky. Let the word of Christ richly dwell within you, teaching, singing with thankfulness in your hearts. Whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of giving thanks. So, yes, singing, and so we're singing and we're worshiping together with thankfulness, or the New King James says, with grace. It's the same word, but here is a preposition instead of a verb, okay? Here in Hebrews, I'll be honest with you, the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't know. Grace is one of those words that has a lot of nuances to it, and I don't have it all figured out. And so what I did is went through and pulled some that I think are pretty much not talking about He saved us by grace. These are different. No, we are to sing songs with grace. With thankfulness? Yes, but is it limited to just thankfulness? No. When I think of somebody, that person has grace. When I think of, I don't know if half of you will get this, but when I think of an older lady with grace, I think of somebody from what part of the country?
South.
The South. The South.
It's a woman with a quiet and gentle spirit, right?
Yes, right.
That's what you're picturing.
Yes, exactly. A woman who is well composed, well poised. It's got to be a guy too, but I'm thinking of one woman right now.
Your mom.
My mom?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mom.
Man, alive.
I'm in trouble now.
Drop the ball early.
No, she'll know. Okay.
I hope y'all.
Yeah, she's from South. Okay, South America. Okay. No, what I'm thinking of is actually it would be. It doesn't matter, but it's Mrs.
Kenita Hall.
Yes, Kenita Hall. That's not who I'm thinking of. But yeah, you got that. Kenita Hall. Right, exactly. Somebody like that. Somebody who, and no matter what the situation is, well, you just do what's. Oh, now I'm thinking of, who am I thinking of? Well, Mrs. Reeves, I'm thinking some other, but you're thinking of a whole slew of people. This is what we're talking about here. This word is more than just be thankful. Yes, be thankful. In Acts 2:47, they were praising God and having favor. This is the only other exactly the same construction that I know of in the New Testament as right here. We are to have favor. They were praising God and having favor with all people. Does that mean that all people were looking at them and saying, that's a good thing going on there? Like we were just talking about Kenita Hall. That's a good thing going on there. Yes, that's true. And I used to limit it, my understanding of this text, to everybody looked at them and said, wow, there's a good thing going on there. But I think this also includes the reason they looked at them and said there was a good thing going on there, because there was a good thing going on among these people. They were full of grace, okay? John 1:14 and 17. Here, the Word became flesh, dwelt among us, and saw His glory, glorious of the only begotten. Full of grace and truth. We saw Him full of grace. This is not talking about His death, burial, resurrection, sacrificial on the cross. This is talking about His life. He was full of grace. Grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. Look at His life, and that's what He's saying here, right? More than just giving thanks. Yes, give thanks. When He arrived in Acts 11:23, Peter said, or Barnabas says, he witnessed the grace of God among the Christians at Antioch. He witnessed the grace of God. Did he see God saving them? No. This is long, or relatively speaking, long after they had been saved. It took him. No, he witnessed changed lives. He witnessed them being people who are full of grace. I think the way we use that word, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the end of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. It'll make them act more like Jesus. Let your speech always be with grace. Each one of us has received a special gift. Employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Paul over and over refers to his own apostleship, that role, that position, that authority, as grace from God. So more than just, I'm saved, but then he put me into this position, and that is a special grace from God. Did I just use special grace in a bad way? Grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord and our Savior, Jesus Christ. So the reason why I don't know everything here is because I'm still growing in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. Titus, turn to Titus. Titus 2:11. The grace of God has appeared. Now this sounds a whole lot like John 1. The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness, worldly desires, to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age, so on and so forth. Looking for the blessed hope and appearing of. So that's we need to grow in that knowledge. Grace informs us. The more we are informed, the more we understand grace, the more it informs us, so on and so forth. That's all I have for let us show gratitude. Yes. Whatever you let the word of Christ richly dwell within you, with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another, psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness or having grace. Comments or questions on this? I need to do a lot of work. Final thought from Hebrews 12. Then I'm ready to move on to Hebrews 13, having not covered too much. All things may pass. Remember, he says, look, we receive something which cannot be shaken. That's what the author of Hebrews says. Somebody says, all things may pass away. The world as we know it may be uprooted. It will be, right? Life as we experience it may come to an end. But one thing stands eternally sure. The relationship of the Christian to God. And so we just look forward to the transition point from here to there. Anybody else, anything else from Hebrews 12? Good. Hebrews 13, questions, answers. I wrote at the top, these questions are easy. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah, they were pretty easy, I thought. Because the text is easy. I'm not saying that understanding it all is easy, but seeing how it's put together is really easy. This is not complicated. May I suggest you run through them, answering the questions, and then you return and jot down your own thoughts, parallel passages, illustrations. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask question 1. And then I'm going to say, what are your thoughts? And then I'll go through mine. Then I'm going to ask question 2. We'll just deal with it easily that way. Question 1. Verse 1. What? Who wants this? Who wants this? John Bosworth.
Let the love of the brethren continue.
Yes. Do you have any of your own thoughts, parallel passages, illustrations, anything like that?
No.
Not right now. Right. Okay. So that's what happens when you're studying this. You know, how much time do this is so evident that you could either make an entire series of sermons based off this, or just read this one time, get the point, and move on. And if we did that, I would have no problem with if somebody else taught that way. I'm not going to right now. I will make a couple. Oh dear, don't go there. Couple points here. Let love of brethren continue. Anybody know what that word is?
Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's where we are. Philadelphia. Okay, we always hear that word, Philadelphia. Okay, so all right. So I am not one of those. I do not think that agape is radically different from phileo. Okay, I don't, and there are reasons for that. Okay, there are differences, but I don't think it's so radically different that. Basically, his point is just love one another. Love, but he's bringing out the brotherly aspect. Look, brethren, I'm talking to you here. By the way, what happened? Think of Galatians and other texts. What often happens when people start believing the wrong doctrine, what happens to their love for each other? They're hand in hand, right? They're hand in hand. So these people some of them are going in the wrong direction, and so what do you know is going to happen? At some point, lack of love is going to raise its ugly head. And he says, brethren, let love of brethren continue. Now, I will point this out. Grammatically, love is the subject of this sentence. Like if somebody were to say, Lee, keep running. Well, everybody here would know who is supposed to keep running. Lee is supposed to keep running. Here the author says, love, keep on going. So we all know who is supposed to keep going. Love is supposed to keep going. And love will do that by itself, won't it? No. He says, let love continue, but who's he actually, it says love continue. Love continue. Okay, so love will do it. No, love won't keep on going on by itself. So who's he talking to here? Who? Everybody? I knew that would be, that's the first person I heard, somebody might have said something else, but the first one I heard was everybody, maybe because I wanted to. No, but everybody. Okay, right, everybody. But when we're not specific, what can everybody lead to? General, yeah, John, you keep up doing the love, and I'm going to take a little break because I've been loving too hard lately. Right? No, so yes, everybody must. And to be explicit, Gary must, Isolde must, and I must too. He's talking to me here, right? Verse 2. I'm done with verse 1. Anybody else thought?
No, we're not done there yet.
Oh, see, Gary, you needed to... Okay. Oh, I didn't ask you, did I? I asked only John Bosworth. Okay. Oh, man. We're going to be here forever. Go ahead. No, it's good.
Love has to be followed by the context of the Bible, because love in Christendom can get so swayed off that you're not truly loving. Do I love you if you're sinning and I don't tell you? No, I do not. I actually hate you.
Yeah.
So there is, it has to be confined within what God has set forth in his work. You know, you had mentioned Galatians, because I thought you were going to go there. When they stop loving, what happens? That's when the biting and devouring starts, because there's some that are not following
love is defined by God's word, and because the heart is more deceitful from all else, who can understand it? And desperately sick, who can understand it? Anybody else? Anything else from verse 1? Yeah?
This is the first of three spots that reminded me of the pray without ceasing verse. This would be the love without ceasing. Later on we get offer a sacrifice of praise without ceasing, and then imitate them without ceasing. I'm putting in without ceasing, but basically do these things continually. Do not stop doing them.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else? Question 2, or actually verse 2. What and why? Who wants it? What and why? Gary does. I can see it already.
Entertain strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe entertain the angels.
Notice there is a pattern through most of this section. There is the what and the why or the how. What and then why, or what and how. I find that interesting. So he's always giving us a little motivation or a little bit fuller instruction. Gary, did you have any your own thoughts, parallel passages, illustrations on this verse?
Well, just some examples. I mean,
Would you like to come up here and take over the class?
no.
That'll be fine with me. Okay, go.
I mean, you have Abraham. Genesis
Right.
18. You know, I mean,
We assume that this is what Lot also.
Lot also. That's right.
Go ahead.
Gideon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Samson and Aaron.
I can't even think of Samson's parents.
Remember? He came and they said, "Let us prepare for you the stuff."
Yeah. I need to review the text. Okay, good. Keep going.
Those are the examples that I
Uh-huh.
had that, you know, and then you can go to places like in Matthew 25, God said, you know, when you've done this to whoever, you've done this to me.
Right.
You know, so which could have a myriad of applications to a lot of these questions.
Right. So Matthew 25, Gary mentioned if you didn't hear it.
I think one unfortunate thing is when we hear the word angel, we tend to think of a heavenly body with wings, and that, you know, that brings a connotation to our mind that isn't necessarily. I mean, the word means messenger.
Right.
Anybody that is a messenger is anybody that carries the message of God.
Right.
Can be thought of as an angel in a sense. I mean, we've had people in our home at times that taught us things. They were angels.
Some by coming, some by leaving.
But no,
Okay. Right.
no, not the ones that were
Yes.
messengers of God.
Right. That's right.
They
That's
were-
right.
They brought blessings by being there.
Yeah.
And they started off as complete strangers too.
Right.
So you got to be careful not to limit that to heavenly
Yes.
beings.
Right. The word angel is the word messenger. If our texts were, I mean, it's good. It's good that we have the word angel, but sometimes it would be nice just to have messenger and let you figure out what it is, and don't throw this little nuance at me that might limit my thinking. Right. Yeah. So don't limit it to that. One person wrote. What did they write? I don't know how much there is to this in reality, but I like the idea. The principle is that it is better to assume that guests are angels and to act accordingly rather than risk treating people unworthily. Right? You know, I'll just assume that you're an angel rather than make the mistake of treating you improperly. Now, you don't have to assume somebody's an angel in order to prevent yourself. You know, just treat them right to begin with. But I like the idea of what he wrote down. Anybody else? Anything else before well, I'll just go. I got something else, and you can too. The idea of so I know that some of you will probably know this word hospitality. Anybody know it? Philoxenia. Okay, so the xenia is the root of the word denotes stranger, but the word has much broader application than that. It's, for example, the idea behind this word, whether or not it's a stranger, is put them up in your house. Okay? That's really the word. For example, in Philemon, so the verb and the noun are so closely used that I'll bounce back and forth between the two of them. In Philemon, verse 22, Philemon 22, at the same time, Paul writes to Philemon, prepare for me here's your word. Now, it doesn't have the word love attached to it, but it has the word that we're supposed to love attached to it. Love Xenia. Well, here's Xenia. So, Philemon, prepare for me a room and love it at the same time. Love what you're doing at the same time. In Acts 16, or no, Acts 10. Okay, so Acts 10, Peter was, in verse 6, here's our word, he is staying with a tanner named Simon whose house is by the sea. So that word, Simon provides him a place to stay. And Simon, being a saint, you better love doing that also. Love providing places to stay. Verse 23, he invited him. So here's verse 16 also, not 16. I thought it was in 16. Verse 23, Cornelius gave them a place to stay. Here's our word again, except this is it's a noun. And then it's several times. It's 4 times in this text. I didn't bother to. Where is it? Verse 18. Verse 18. Simon, who is also called Peter, they wondered whether he was. There's your word, staying there. Verse 23, verse 32, therefore send to Joppa and invite Simon, who is called Peter, to come to you. He is staying there. And chapter 21, 16, they're going along. Where is this? Chapter 21, verse 16. Some of the disciples came from Caesarea, also came taking us to Nason of Cyprus, a disciple of longstanding with whom we were to stay at. The word in Acts 28, where Paul was imprisoned in one of these rooms, okay, a lodging, okay? So not, at that time, he's not in a pit or a dungeon or anything like that. So, our word, Hebrews 13:2, do not neglect to show, and the New American Standard will use, and most of yours will use the word hospitality to strangers, for by this some have almost exactly the same word. The root is the same. But most of your versions will have what? Entertain. And that does carry with it the idea of, look, you don't just give them a room, but you also, what do you need? What do you need? And guess what? Verse 1 and verse 2 put together, and Gary mentioned Matthew 25. I was hungry, I was sick, I was in prison, and that'll be in what, verse 3? See, all these go together. They all go together. So we're dealing with each other. 3 John 5. Beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, especially when they are. Now here's. No, is that the word? I don't know if that's the word stranger or not. Doesn't matter. But the idea is there. When they're strangers, you don't know them. And they have testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God, for they went out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support such men, so that we may be fellow workers with the truth, which is kind of what John was talking about a little bit. Look, this person came in. They were strange to begin with, but they taught us something, and they left because we did this to them. Again, not limited. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9 will say. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9 says, be hospitable to one another without complaint. Notice the word, this is the exact same word. Exactly. In fact, most of the times that your versions translate this, it will not include anything about strangers. But it's the same word. Okay? My point is this. Yes, it does talk about strangers, but that word stranger has more to do with the idea of what you're doing for this person. If you read the word hospitality, be hospitable, and you said to yourself, okay, I need to build a hospital, would you have nailed it? Would you have? No. But you see the word, you see the mistake that you're making. The same thing with philoxenia. Oh, this is talking about strangers. It can include strangers, but it's much broader than that. It's actually talking about what you're doing for whoever it is. So be aware of that. Somebody said, well, no, we'll skip that for now. Anybody else? Anything else?
Question, because I'm confused.
Oh dear, I've done it again.
Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Is the philoxenia the phrase hospitality to strangers, or is the word hospitality?
Right here,
Yes.
hospitality to strangers. Most of your versions include the words
So
to
this
strangers.
specific verse is not trying to remind you additionally of the strangers. It's not saying, yes, y'all are showing hospitality to everybody else,
I would not
but don't
suggest
forget
that.
strangers.
I would suggest that this verse may be. First of all, it's in contrast to, I'm not saying it can be in contrast to verse 1, love the brethren.
Yeah.
Verse 2, love the stranger. And why? Because verse 1 says love the brethren, and verse 2 also includes, for some by this have entertained angels without knowing it. Well, I know you pretty well, and I'm thinking you're not an angel. Okay? I mean, don't get me wrong. You're right. So I think verse 2 does lean toward like 3 John 5, 6, and 7.
And you're saying the word entertain is extremely similar to the word hospitality.
Okay, the zinnia, the second part of...
Because my other confusion is
Yes,
we
I
got
think
those
the short
things
answer
where,
is yes.
how do we get from a place where the word entertain means serving other people to amusing ourselves, like we use it today?
Because we are... So the word entertain, now you're dealing with the English language, and the word entertain in English language
Comes from a completely different place.
No, it's morphed.
It's morphed. Okay,
Yeah.
it has changed.
Right, but we entertain others. You want to watch me entertain you? It'll be entertaining for me. You're right. So we entertain others. Yeah. And we do that two ways. Haha, I make you laugh, and come over to my house. What did you do this afternoon? We entertained. You know, we used... did y'all not use that word that way growing up around? Or when they were growing up? Apparently not. Right. Okay. I will make this point, though. John's point is extremely valid. John Bosworth said, some have entertained angels without knowing it. John's point is, that word is just messenger. And that can happen. He had an anecdotal experience here that he told us about. 3 John 5, 6, and 7 tells us about that. That it can be just a messenger, just a preacher, or a messenger, whatever you want to call it. On the other hand, Gary did mention Lot, Abraham, Samson, and Gideon, and others. Now, I allow that this word includes that. Which to me, to be short, is an appeal to sensationalism. Hey, this could happen. So I was off some. Whoa, slow down, Lee. Okay, does the Bible make sensational appeals ever? Yeah, you ever read the book of Revelation? I mean, that is overwhelming on the senses, and that is God's point. Okay, the Bible doesn't. You don't base your faith on sensationalism. You don't focus on sensationalism, except for when you're looking at God, right? But there is appeals that are sensational appeals in the Bible, so keep that in mind. While we're talking about others, it's sensational. Yes, and that can be wrong to focus on that. But if God provided it, what He provides as the sensation, focus on it all day long, up and down. Verse 3, remember the prisoners. Oh dear, we're out of time, guys. So just remember the prisoners for the rest of the week. Yeah, we're out of time for now. Thank you for your work. We'll break till right on the hour.